Hey everybody, welcome back. My name is Elise and this is 10 to Life, where we talk everything true crime. So if you're brand new and stopping by for the first time and you enjoy today's video and think that this may be the channel for you, hit that subscribe button below and turn your notification bell to on so that you get notified of new case videos as they drop or live streams as they happen in real time. And if you're a returning subscriber, thanks so much for coming back and sticking with me. I love you guys. You're beyond amazing. I love seeing all the familiar names always popping up in the comments and the chat. So welcome back and thank you again for your continued support. The case we're talking about today is one that many of you guys have been requesting, and it's one that is kind of working its way back into the media, but the reason that there's so many people interested in this case is because there are so many different conflicting views, not only on how the case was handled, but how it ultimately was then resolved, and it kind of has become a pretty big point of contention for the public. A lot of people divided. And when I started researching this case myself, I have to admit, I think there were a lot of missteps that happened along the way. And I also think quite a few of the punishments and, I don't even want to say punishments, but I guess some of the outcome, I don't think that it was quite fair and I don't think that it was warranted. So we're going to talk about this case in detail, and it's one of the cases that's a little bit more complex. So stick with me, guys, because you're going to be with me for a little while here.
10 to Life with Elise starts right now.
On February 20th, 2009, the community in Wampum, Pennsylvania was absolutely shaken to its core when a local resident, just 26 years old and full-term pregnant, Kenzie Houck, was found dead with a gunshot wound to her head. But who would want to kill this pregnant woman? Who would want to kill her unborn child? And who would want to inflict this much pain on the two of them? At the time of her death, Kenzie was a mom to 2 daughters and had her little boy on the way. Her older daughter, Janessa, was 7 years old, and her other daughter, Adeline, was just 4 years old. Kenzie worked as a hairstylist, and she was a stay-at-home mom. And she was living her absolute dream. Kenzie had dreamed of being a mother. She was so happy. She had escaped a previously abusive relationship, and she now was engaged to the father of her unborn son. Kenzie's fiance, Chris, also had another child. He had a son named Jordan, and Jordan was 11 years old. And Jordan and Chris were the all-American father-son duo. Jordan was a 5th grader, a baseball player, the quarterback of the football team that his father coached. I mean, a true cookie-cutter, all-American family. The two of them also enjoyed going hunting together in their spare time, and the two of them were really inseparable because at a very young age, Chris had received full custody of Jordan. Now, what I love about this story and this love story is that it really goes back to a small town feel because this community just had over 600 people in it. I mean, very, very small. Literally, my high school was 4 times the size of this entire community. But Kenzie and Chris grew up in that community together, starting at just a very young age. And it's the type of community where everybody knows each other. There's tons of outdoor activities. Everybody gets together for the barbecues, for this, for that. Everybody just knows everybody. Now, while they were very young, they didn't necessarily have that romantic spark, but they reconnected once they were older, once they both were adults and both had already had children from previous relationships. So they reconnected, sparks are flying, and they started dating in May of 2008. The two of them immediately blended families and shortly moved in after beginning dating. And the blending of family, where it usually can sometimes be a little bit tough and can be a tough adjustment for the children to not only meet the other children, but then with this new, parent figure in their life, that wasn't the case here. They were blending together very seamlessly, so much so that Jordan was even calling Kenzie mom. He was also extremely ecstatic that he was going to be getting a little brother, the little brother that he always wanted. But that perfect small town fairy tale turned into a nightmare when everything changed that brisk February morning. That morning, Chris was running late for work, and he worked at a nearby Steelite tableware company. He worked in the factory division, and Kenzie had asked Chris to stay home because she wasn't feeling very well that morning with the pregnancy and it being so close to the end. However, bills come, we all know they do, so Chris had to still go to work. The two older kids, Janessa and Jordan, both got up and began getting ready for school. As they were getting ready, Jordan headed downstairs to grab some clothes because at the time he was in the process of switching rooms. The new baby that was on the way, his baby brother, was going to be taking over his room and he was going to be moving rooms. At approximately 8:15, the bus came to pick the two children up and they headed off to school. And the 4-year-old Adeline was still asleep upstairs in her room when the two older children left. Kenzie and Chris had hired tree trimmers to come to the property that day to trim up some of the trees surrounding the property. They showed up around 9 a.m. to complete this service, but shortly after showing up, they noticed that the 4-year-old Adeline was in the front doorway and she was sobbing. Adeline then tells these workers that something is seriously wrong. So the tree trimmers, obviously extremely alarmed and worried, called 911 right away. Upon first sight of Kenzie, the police and the paramedics assumed that she had hemorrhaged. They called in the coroner, though, who realized that something was off as he began to move Kenzie around and see her mobility. And police recall the coroner saying, "We have a problem," something that you never want to hear. And in that moment is when the gunshot wound was discovered. Now, by this time, police had already failed to secure the scene properly. My guess, and it hasn't been confirmed anywhere, is because they had assumed she just hemorrhaged and that this was possibly a result of the pregnancy. So they didn't think that there was any crime scene to secure. But at this point now, that they're finding the gun wound, they see that, oh my God, holy crap, we need to secure this because this is a crime scene. And by this point, everything was already contaminated. Doorknobs, pathways where you're walking, everything, fingerprints, everything at this point that would be checked for DNA, for gunshot residue, for fingerprints, was contaminated. As they start doing a search in the house, they do find many guns. But remember, this wasn't that out of the normal because Chris and Jordan enjoyed going hunting together. But when they started searching outside, they found 3 20-gauge shell casings. And Jordan owned a 20-gauge. He got it as a Christmas gift just 2 months prior. One of these shells that they found ended up being the main focus of their investigation because it was in pristine condition along the fence under a stack of frozen leaves. And if it's just parked there and sitting there under frozen leaves, I mean, obviously it would be in good condition because it isn't exposed to the elements, it's somewhat protected. So while this isn't looking great because they see all the guns in the house, they are recovering some of these shell casings, they still weren't able to identify a murder weapon. And to this day, a murder weapon has still not been confirmed. So we don't know if that 20-gauge shotgun is in fact what killed Kenzie. Immediately, police called Kenzie's fiance, Chris, to bring him home to tell him what was going on and tell him what happened. They also interviewed him at police headquarters, tested his hands for gunshot residue, and no gunshot residue turned up. He had an alibi from when he was at work, so he was pretty quickly dismissed as any sort of suspect. Then police go to Jordan and Janessa's school to interview the two children to see if anything was amiss that morning. They interviewed the two children, but they did not record the interviews, and that is a key piece of information as we continue here. When discussing the morning with Janessa, she says that she didn't remember anything from that morning, that nothing stood out as being amiss or possibly suspicious. She said she remembers her mom Kenzie yelling for them that they needed to hurry because they were going to miss the bus, but that was really it. And she says then they ran out the door. Jordan, however, had pretty much the same story, with the exception of as they were running out the door, he says that he spotted a black truck on the street. He said that it was close to the side of the driveway, and so he had chalked it up to thinking that it was the tree trimmers that were coming that morning because he knew that they were scheduled to come. And when the police asked the bus driver what they saw, he says that he saw the two of the kids racing down the driveway every morning, and they did that same way that morning, just ran down the driveway to catch the bus, which we all know, I mean, speaking, I guess, on personal experience, when you are late for school, which is usually 9 times out of 10 when you're that age, you are hauling ass and you are running as fast as you can to catch that bus or catch that ride. So the two of them are racing down the driveway, and apparently Jordan won this foot race as usual, but the bus driver says nothing else seemed out of the normal. They got on the bus and we headed to school. After these interviews took place, Janessa and Adeline went to one of Kenzie's family members' homes, just trying to process everything and wait for more information. Meanwhile, Chris was with Jordan. And apparently, Kenzie's parents were being told that Jordan was in the process of being looked into. And the police shared what information they had about Jordan and why they were looking into him further, so this prompted more police interviews with Janessa and Jordan. So many interviews that finally, on the fourth interview, it was recorded. And what's crazy is that they didn't record any of the interviews up until this fourth interview, and this interview is the only one that was recorded. And during this interview, Janessa's story changed. Janessa now was saying that she remembers Jordan was moving guns around that morning, saying that she was waiting downstairs for Jordan, and as she was waiting, she heard a huge thud upstairs, but didn't think anything of it. Now, although Jordan is only 11 years old, it's not unlikely or really out of the norm for young boys of this age in rural areas to have guns. I have a handful of friends who had guns at young ages for hunting, for shooting, whatever it was. So although he leans a little bit on the younger side, it wasn't really abnormal. But now with this new statement of Jordan moving his guns around in the morning and then Janessa hearing a huge loud thud, it starts to make you wonder a little bit, and it starts to raise concern. And although the events are raising concern themselves, equally as concerning that Janessa didn't recall these events until after she was already with Kenzie's family, and now in her fourth interview is when this new detail emerges. How would she not have remembered a loud thud initially, or the fact that Jordan was playing with his guns or moving his guns around that morning, especially if police are interviewing you about something that happened to your mom? How is it taking you this long to recall those details? And sure, maybe the memory was suppressed because of, the shock and the grief. Maybe. It just seems to me a little unlikely. So the implication here was that as Janessa was waiting downstairs for Jordan, he shot Kenzie and then ran down the stairs as they then raced down the driveway and headed into the bus. But realistically, how would Jordan have had time to go and shoot Kenzie before leaving for school and going to the bus, especially if one of the last things they heard Kenzie say was her basically scolding them, saying, "Hurry up, you're going to miss the bus." Janessa then shares another detail that she hadn't included in earlier interviews, and that was that Jordan had thrown something out of his pocket as they were running to the bus. However, the bus driver, whose story has not changed a single time, maintains that he watched both of them run down the driveway the entire time, and he didn't see Jordan throw anything. So as police are doing these additional interviews, Jordan also begins to give more information. But this additional information is regarding that black truck that was parked near the home. And he says that he now remembers seeing somebody behind the wheel of that truck in a trucker hat. So that's definitely a big change. I mean, when he initially had said he saw the truck, did he not recall seeing anybody in the truck? And if he had the trucker hat, I mean, maybe. I guess he could have thought it was the tree trimmers. I don't know. It also is unlikely, I think, that somebody forgets that they hear a thud or a suspected gunshot. But these stories started to changing slowly. But if Jordan's story was true, who was this man in the black truck? And why was he at their house when now we know that it wasn't the tree trimmers? Now, remember we talked a little bit in the beginning about Kenzie escaping an abusive relationship. Well, a man by the name of Adam Harvey was Kenzie's ex-boyfriend for approximately 6 years, and Adam drove a black truck, and Kenzie was described as being in complete fear of Adam. Her and her family had actually already filed orders of protection against Adam for abuse. And they filed these restraining orders because of more than just one incident. And in one of the forms that they filed this restraining order against Adam, I'm going to read this for you because Kenzie stated, "Adam called my mother's phone and threatened to take my whole family out when he comes to town. He has left several messages threatening to hurt me and my family. I am in fear of him hurting me physically or my family. He has a drinking problem that is uncontrollable. He has threatened to hire someone to hurt me several times. I have been talking to the police and they listened to the message on my mother's cell phone and suggested to me to get a PFA." And this is just one of those protection orders. Another form that she had filed stated, "We were arguing regarding my niece, and then Adam and I started to argue. I said, 'Shut up and act like the adult.' He then threatened me. I went to leave in my car and he took the keys. He left a big bruise on my forearm. His brother showed up and threatened me, and they both left when the police arrived." And apparently recently, things got pretty heated and combative between Kenzie and Adam over money and child support. Kenzie had named Adam as the father of young Adeline, just 4 years old, and they did a paternity test. And just a week before Kenzie's death, the paternity results came back, and they showed that Adam was not the father. And that set something off in Adam, and it sent him on a tirade against Kenzie and her family, calling them over and over and over again. He would leave them threatening messages, he would call and threaten them, and the night before Kenzie's murder, he actually ran into Kenzie's family. They were at a local restaurant eating, and Adam went into the restaurant to pick up some food for himself. After he confronted her family and an argument ensued and there was yelling and it got loud and aggressive, he ultimately ended up being restrained and kicked out of the restaurant. And then Kenzie was found dead less than 12 hours later. Is that a coincidence? Is that a coincidence? Because right now you have a history of DV, somebody who clearly threatens you and your family, has motive because he's angry that he's not the father of your daughter, but then you have an 11-year-old boy who the police are looking at as a real suspect, who doesn't have any motive, who was calling you mom and loves you. The morning of the murder, police stopped Adam and started questioning him, but they weren't convinced that he had anything to do with it. And one of their biggest reasons was that they didn't believe that he could have made the 24-mile drive with his truck still having snow on it from where it originated. I have driven for hours in my Jeep before when it had snowed, like up in the mountains, and snow can remain. And I don't know the exact weather. I need to look into it, guys. But when I lived in New York, it's like snow would stay on vehicles for days. Even if it was a thin layer, it would still stay, especially if it was frozen to the touch or extremely cold that morning to where it's not melting and evaporating right away. So I can understand the thought process, I guess, a little bit, but it also seems like a pretty big stretch to clear somebody and to mark them as innocent just because there was snow on their truck still. During the interview with police, Adam explained to them the issues with that paternity test. But he also told police that he didn't know where Kenzie lived after moving in with Chris, which I find very hard to believe considering it is such a small town with only 600 people. If you are going to the lengths of phoning her all the time, you're running into her family at the local restaurant, you are keeping tabs on her and threatening her, I don't think it's a far stretch to think that you knew where she lived. Police decide to test his hands for gunshot residue, but the test comes back as clean. He then tells police that he was up at his father's house till approximately 9 a.m. that morning, and his dad confirmed his alibi. He also agreed to do a polygraph, and he was then cleared from the investigation. Chris and Jordan decided to stay at Chris's parents' house, and at 3:30 a.m., just 18 hours after Kenzie's death, they were woken up to the sound of a loud banging on the front door. Chris and Jordan had just fallen asleep, and Jordan actually fell asleep crying in Chris's arms. So what was this banging on the door at 3:30 in the morning? Well, it was the police. And the police were there to arrest Jordan, just 11 years old. Jordan, just 11 years old, was being charged as an adult with first-degree premeditated murder of Kenzie and of his unborn baby brother. And the evidence that police had to make this arrest was that piece of information that had changed in Janessa's story, the story that she gave after the 4th interview. There was also a blanket with gunshot residue and a hole in it, which leads me to believe it was used to muffle the sound, and then the bullet goes through, you get the residue, you get the hole. Sometimes people do that with Ziploc bags. So it wasn't detailed or confirmed, but that's my belief. And prosecutors argued later on that this blanket was used to actually hide the weapon, the shotgun, as Jordan went downstairs to shoot Kenzie. Later on, the prosecution added that Jordan's coat and jeans each had one particle of gunshot residue. And they also said that his gun smelled as though it had been recently fired. However, Jordan had gone to a turkey hunt less than a week before Kenzie was killed, and he wore that coat and he wore those jeans. So could he have shot that same 20 gauge that was his brand new Christmas present that he used for hunting? Seems pretty possible, seems pretty likely. And when shooting, could he possibly still have gunshot residue on that coat? Seems pretty likely. There were no fingerprints on Jordan's gun, and they never tested his hands for gunshot residue. The police simply went off this revised story of Janessa and the fact that there was that one particle of gunshot residue on his coat and on his jeans. But if he had shot that gun the morning that Kenzie was murdered, Wouldn't there be more gunshot residue on that coat? Wouldn't there be more gunshot residue for them to find in evidence? And more than that, it just goes back to what was the motive here? And you get this, police say that Jordan's motive for killing his soon-to-be mother, the person he already called mom, is that he was jealous of his soon-to-be baby brother and that he was mad about their rooms being switched around. Based on the police's timeline and theory, it means that Janessa and Jordan would have had to have walked out of that house together. Then Jordan would have had to run back inside, run up the stairs, grab his gun, come back down, grab the ammunition that was loaded in the dresser, all without waking Kenzie, without seeing Kenzie, and while the bus is waiting out front. Then he would have had to shoot Kenzie without getting any traces of blood on his clothes, then clean the gun himself of any residue of that gun or any tissues or bodily fluids that come and spray back, all while leaving no fingerprints on the gun. Then he would have had to run the gun back upstairs, hide it or put it away, run back downstairs, and somehow get through the front door to the top of the driveway where Janessa was and race Janessa to the bus like the bus driver said he saw. And the police say that this is what happened. I wish I was messing with you. The police say that that is what happened, that entire thing took place in a matter of 120 seconds. First of all, it doesn't seem at all possible that an 11-year-old could plan something so strategic to where they would, have the perfect crime essentially with no residue, no this, no that, and do it so fast. Like the Energizer Bunny. How would an 11-year-old think this up, and how would he execute to this? And let's just say, even if he were a complete sociopath, even if Jordan was, the craziest 11-year-old to have ever been born and to ever live, he did all of this in 120 seconds, and then you mean to tell me he happily just raced his soon-to-be sister down the driveway, hopped in the bus, went to school, and had a normal day at school without acting like anything was amiss? I find it very hard to believe that an 11-year-old could pull off this brutal, strategic murder without leaving a mess behind, a trace of evidence behind, having any odd behavior himself that day, and all within record time. Now, because of the law in Pennsylvania, Jordan had to be charged as an adult, which goes with a life sentence. After Jordan was arrested, Chris's father immediately called an attorney, and this attorney got to work. Jordan was being held separately in the jail because at the time the jail said that they didn't have enough room to accommodate for children, so at the time he was going to be held separately from the other inmates. And not only did they not have room and a system built to accommodate a child of Jordan's age, they didn't even have the jumpsuits to fit a child Jordan's age, and his had to be rolled several times just to fit him. His attorney argued that because of Jordan's age, he should be remanded to a juvenile facility, something that most people would normally agree with. However, at the time, the judge refused to send him to a juvenile center. He said that he found absolutely no evidence that could have been used to say that anyone else but Jordan killed Kenzie, and that because Jordan wasn't agreeing with the prosecution to give them a confession, he could not go to a juvenile rehab center. However, not only is it Jordan's Fifth Amendment right to say that he was innocent, but also you're saying that the only reason you're charging him as an adult is because he will not confess? And that if he were to confess, you would put him in a juvenile center? How does that at all read fair? Finally, on February 24th, Jordan was moved to a juvenile center, but then he was moved to another center that was over 230 miles away. However, his father, Chris, drove those 230 miles every single day to see Jordan. He spent 4 hours in the car every day just to make sure that Jordan knew that he was loved and that he was not alone and that his father supported him. But all of this back and forth, of course, absolutely destroyed the finances for this family. Chris lost his job because of this and because he was always going every single day to see his son, which I completely understand. But then any single bit of money that was still coming in after losing his job went to gas, went to groceries, and other necessities that he needed in order to see Jordan. Chris remained convinced that Jordan had absolutely nothing to do with Kenzie's death. Now, for all of my parents out there, I know the saying goes, and my mom used to tell me this when I was younger, I know when you're lying. I raised you, I grew you, I know by your face, I know by your tone of voice, I know when you're lying to me. And now that I'm a parent, I can 100% say that that is absolutely true. I know when my little 2.5-year-old is lying to me about something, when he's like trying to get away with like having a lollipop for dinner or something like that, which he's not allowed to do. But my parents know. You can tell usually more times than not when your kid's trying to pull one over, because you know them, you've studied them, you know their behavior, you know their facial expressions, everything. So Chris had said that he asked Jordan on multiple occasions if he had anything to do with this, how he felt about Kenzie, and that he could tell by Jordan's reactions and by his facial expressions that he was not lying. Now, Jordan wasn't this sinister 11-year-old mastermind. He was 11 years old and still believed in Santa and the Easter Bunny. A pure, innocent child. And Chris was positive that his child, who he knew so well, who was innocent, who still believed in Santa and the Easter Bunny, could not have committed murder. Especially a murder like Kenzie's, which didn't leave a shred of evidence behind. And again, also going back to there being zero motive. Jordan was formally arraigned on May 6, 2009, and he was charged with 1 count of first-degree criminal homicide and 1 count of first-degree criminal homicide of an unborn child. Jordan, of course, pleaded not guilty. During this time, Jordan was at the Thomas Center, and his attorney and a second attorney for him argued trying to get him to go to a juvenile center. And they filed many motions saying that this case should be moved to juvenile court. Almost a year later, on March 29, 2010, the judge denied this motion, and the judge ordered that Jordan still be tried as an adult. And the reason behind it was a psychiatrist who had recently spent time with Jordan, and this psychiatrist concluded that since Jordan would not take responsibility for his action, the prospects of rehabilitation within the juvenile court jurisdiction was not likely to be successful. Again, saying because he's not taking responsibility, if he's not guilty, he's not going to take responsibility. Luckily, in August of 2011, the Pennsylvania trial court ordered that this case immediately be moved to juvenile court. And the court stated, "The transfer of this case to the juvenile division of this court will serve the public interest. The court specifically finds that the defendant is amenable to treatment, supervision, and rehabilitation as a juvenile after considering his age, mental capacity, maturity, whether he can be rehabilitated prior to the expiration of juvenile court jurisdiction." This change was also due to the fact that the original manner in which the trial court had handled this case really violated Jordan's Fifth Amendment right. The Fifth Amendment right as to not incriminate himself. If Jordan had been tried as an adult, and if he would have been found as guilty, he would have been sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. However, in juvenile court, the juvenile justice system would have jurisdiction over him until he turned 21. Then this case was transferred over to Judge John Hodge, and Jordan's trial started in April of 2012. And in this trial, Jordan took the stand for the double homicide. As I mentioned in the start of this video, there were a lot of conflicting views on not only these charges, but the trial itself. And this trial was very emotional and very angering for people on both sides of it.
Today, T-shirts in support of the boy Jordan Brown, an answer back to the T-shirts worn by family and friends of shotgun victim Kenzie Houck, who prosecutors say Brown killed when he was 11 and she was nearly 9 months pregnant.
We're just here to support Jordan because we know he's innocent, we believe in him, and we'd like to get through this stage so that they can find the real killer and actually give some justice to baby Christopher and Kenzie.
The victim's mom and dad, Deb and Jack Houck, are troubled by what they see inside and outside the courtroom.
There's absolutely no emotion on their side. I don't know. You must not have a heart. I don't know.
It's upsetting. It's hard. It's just hard.
I understand it's a tragedy that what happened, but I really don't honestly believe my nephew did this. So, I mean, we're all going to fight for him and hope that he comes walking out this courtroom today.
For years, he's maintained his silence about the accusations against his son. But today, here at Lawrence County Court, Jordan Brown's father finally spoke out, and he had plenty to say.
Jordan loved Kenzie, still does, and he misses her.
With a judge deciding tomorrow whether his son will go free, Chris Brown told reporters 14-year-old Jordan did not kill Chris's pregnant fiancée, Kenzie Houck, in February 2009.
I hope that justice is served, Jordan is released, and at this point, you can never give back what's been taken from him. but we can move from this day forward and try to make his life as best as possible.
But Kenzie Houck's father has a different idea about justice being served. He's hoping the judge finds Jordan responsible for her death, but says he's worried because of what he says were lies told on the witness stand.
When you're in there hearing lies, it's horrible. You know, when somebody gets up there and swears not to lie on the stand and then they're lying, it's horrible to hear.
Houck refused to elaborate, but we know that only 3 witnesses testified for the defense. One of them was Chris Brown.
My testimony was as honest as could be, but he is correct. There was a lot of lying on that stand.
For the second straight day, the Brown and Houck families exchanged harsh words outside the courtroom, prompting a warning from sheriff's deputies.
You know, I feel bad, genuinely feel bad for the Houck family that they have been convinced by this team of investigators who conducted an inadequate investigation that Jordan did this.
One of the biggest arguments in this trial was over the alleged murder weapon. There was no evidence, no eyewitness, no blood or biological evidence of Kenzie's that was on that gun to prove that it was the murder weapon. The evidence they had was the smell of a gun, was that one particle on Jordan's coat, Janessa's changed story, and a few of those shell casings that they found at the property. These investigators were not firearm professionals. They weren't trained on how a gun smells when it's recently fired. Could they have been smelling something from days earlier? Could those casings have been from one of the hunting trips or accidentally dropping them? Too much reasonable doubt here. The trial lasted for 3 days, and on April 13th, 2012, Jordan was found to be delinquent, which in juvenile court means guilty, and he was sentenced to jail until his 21st birthday. However, on June 13th, 2016, 2 months before his 18th birthday, he was actually released on probation. He was released into the custody of his uncle in Ohio, and at this point it had been over 7 years since that murder of Kenzie took place. During Jordan's time in jail or prison, whatever you want to, however you want to describe it, he taught himself how to play guitar, he taught himself to become good at basketball, and he kept a GPA of a 3.9, something that people in school can't even keep. He also graduated high school 3 days before his release. Upon his release, Jordan also started college for computer science. At the time of his conviction, Jordan had a third attorney, and all 3 of those attorneys filed appeals for Jordan. On July 18th, 2018, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court overturned Jordan's conviction with a unanimous vote of 5-0. They all agreed that there was insufficient evidence against Jordan and that a trial should have never taken place. Jordan was completely exonerated from this crime that he was convicted of 7 years earlier, and this now, of course, means double jeopardy sticks and he can never be convicted of this crime again.
At the first press conference since his conviction was unanimously overturned by the state Supreme Court, his lawyers told him not to answer questions, but Jordan Brown made a slight correction about his college major.
He'll be a sophomore here, starting back up the end of August, beginning of September, and information, not technology, information business. Systems. He spoke.
But that was it from Brown. He let his lawyers, Daniel Alisco and Stephen Colafella, and his father, Chris, do all the talking.
We believe that there was a rush to judgment, and we also believe that he was the casualty of a system that broke down.
The 11-year-old was charged with killing his father's fiancée and her unborn child based on evidence that the Supreme Court called insufficient as a matter of law to overcome the child's presumption of innocence.
It's been a long road. As far as getting news of the exoneration, it was kind of bittersweet, so to speak. Overwhelmed with joy, but still full of sorrow, knowing that, we really won't have closure.
That's because the killer of Chris Brown's fiancée is still out there.
There are people involved in this case that are sworn to investigate. I would just hope that they would do that. I would hope they would reopen the case and pursue the actual murderer, who, by the way, has been walking the streets for 9 years.
State police did the original investigation, but no word yet on whether the cold case will be reopened. As for Jordan's future,
there's no doubt in my mind he's going to be a productive member of society. He's going to do great things. He's got good things coming.
Kenzie's 2 daughters still live with Kenzie's parents, their grandparents, and they still remain adamant that nobody could have done this to Kenzie except for Jordan. They believe Jordan was jealous that the baby was getting all of the new attention and that he was having to switch rooms, and that was his motive for killing Kenzie. They also firmly believe that Jordan still should be behind bars. In 2020, Jordan ended up filing a civil lawsuit against not only the former Pennsylvania State Police Commissioner, but also the 4 troopers that investigated the crime and ultimately arrested him. And the civil affidavits are absolutely shocking. Amongst many other things, here is a general overview of the civil case. Jordan's civil attorney in that lawsuit alleges that the investigators failed to actually follow protocols for interviewing children when they interviewed Kenzie's 2 daughters. Department policy says that they should have recorded that very first interview and not have allowed multiple adults to come in and out of the room. It's also policy that the case is not talked about in front of children, and in the event that multiple interviews are required, the first interview is the one that is supposed to be used and deemed as most reliable. Which he goes on to mention that Janessa was interviewed 4 times and only the 4th one was recorded. So there was virtually no possibility of them relying on the first interview if they never recorded it. But if they did rely on it, there wouldn't have been any red flags that had gone up, because Janessa had told them in that first interview that they were getting ready for school that morning like any other morning, and that she and Jordan left the house together, ran down the driveway onto the bus, and headed to school. Janessa had only started talking about that mysterious boom upstairs after she had been with her grandparents.
Jordan Brown made national news as an 11-year-old killer. Now his attorneys say it never happened, and claim the Pennsylvania State Police robbed him of his youth.
You're a kid. They took that from Jordan. And when they took it from him at 3 a.m. in the middle of the night with flashlights pointed in his face for a crime he did not commit, the first place that they put him was in a solitary confinement in an adult facility.
The attorneys say police fabricated evidence and hid evidence that would have exonerated Brown.
Absolutely no evidence, direct or circumstantial, that indicating that Jordan Brown committed this crime. There's not a single piece of physical evidence. There was no DNA. There were no fingerprints. There was nothing.
Instead, they relied on the statement of a 7-year-old girl who changed her story.
She was interviewed 4 times against protocol on the day that her mother was found dead. And most specifically, none of them were recorded except for the 4th of those interviews, which occurred after midnight.
The lawsuit also alleges that these investigators failed to properly investigate Kenzie's ex-boyfriend, Adam, the one who had threatened her multiple times, who saw her family just 12 hours before the murder, who was extremely angry because he had just found out a few days earlier that he wasn't the father of his suspected daughter. The attorney also says in the lawsuit that state police investigators failed to include any sort of exculpatory evidence that indicated somebody else could have committed the murders in their affidavit that they used to charge Jordan with these murders, although it is said that plenty of evidence did in fact exist. That lawsuit also provided a transcript of a conversation that was had with a former girlfriend of Jordan's father, Chris. And during that interview, she says multiple times that she was absolutely not scared ever of Jordan. But the summary of that interview didn't include that. Instead, the summary that was provided by troopers in regards to this interview was changed to claim that this woman said that she didn't want her interview to be used against the boy because she was scared of him. It was just one of over 6 mischaracterizations in the summary of this entire transcript. In addition to these people being held accountable, Jordan wants money back. He wants those thousands of dollars that his father spent in gas money to be refunded back to his father. From all of those trips every day, 4 hours, 230 miles to go and see Jordan. But now Jordan has also been diagnosed with PTSD because of the criminal case. So there may be a lot of other things coming out of this civil case. Troopers maintain that Jordan was in fact the murderer of Kenzie and her unborn child. A retired investigator who worked the case says, "This case was investigated by some of the finest police officers in this country, plain and simple. And none of us wanted to put handcuffs on an 11-year-old. That's where the case took us. I have never looked back that we arrested the wrong person, in my opinion. And I would assume every trooper who investigated that case feels the exact same way. We did not get this wrong. There is not a trooper on scene that day that has lost 1 second of sleep over this case." So nobody else is currently incarcerated for the killing of Kenzie or her unborn child. And I want to know what your theories and thoughts are on this case. Do you think Jordan killed Kenzie? Do you think that he was jealous of his new baby brother coming in? Do you think he was pissed off that he had to switch rooms? Do you think that he whiplashed through the house like a tornado in 120 seconds and executed this perfect murder of sorts? Or do you think he was framed for this? Do you think that it was potentially the ex-boyfriend, even though he alibied out from his father and didn't have gunshot residue on his hands? Because without a doubt, the evidence in this case was handled poorly, absolutely. But we still don't know what actually concrete happened to Kenzie. So I'm interested to know what your thoughts are on this. Let me know what you think in the comments below. And if there's other information you've heard about this case, I'm interested to know that too. This is, again, a very complex case, and so many people are on divided sides over it. So I'm sure there are other details that perhaps maybe I missed, or things that you've heard that haven't been confirmed. So I'm interested to know what your thoughts are, any other information you know and that has led you to what your belief is, and let's get a discussion going in the comments. Thanks for tuning in with me today, guys. I hope you enjoyed the case. And again, if this seems like a channel for you that you like, hit that subscribe button, turn your notification bell to on so that you get notified of new case videos as they drop, or live streams as they happen in real time when we're covering cases when they're like literally in the hearing or in the trial. And don't forget to give this video a thumbs up on your way out. Thanks so much for tuning in with me today, guys. I hope you enjoyed the case, and until the next one, stay safe. Bye.